Archaeodeath Field Reports. Hello and welcome to another Archaeodeath, because what's Dyke is on my mind at the moment with the lockdown situation. It's one of the few early medieval monuments I can get to on my bike and walking. So I'm going to give you an introduction here to another set of compiled videos I've been taking while out and about, looking at what's Dyke, this late 8th, early 9th century, possibly most likely early 9th century linear earthwork, possibly built as a Western frontier work controlling movement in times of peace and war by the Mercian, the Middle Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia, the Mercian kingdom. Before I show you those videos, I want to give you a bit of a rationale of why I'm doing this. So if I can go on to my my other screen here. Now, my Archaeodeath blog has covered a lot of topics, and recently I did a review of the 4th of April 2020 event that took place in Trevon in Shropshire, where, because of COVID-19, we went digital. And as part of that, I did some videos, and at the very end, we did a tragical history tour which is now on YouTube, with me, 13 videos of me at various points in and around the village of Trevon and in Shropshire, showing you Offers Dyke. And I thought, well, to be honest, I've long been visiting bits of what's Dyke and critiquing how it's interpreted in the landscape. So, for example, here at Wrexham Cemetery, across the paths, you can see the line what's Dyke is marked out on the ground. But frustratingly, even though it's had new signboards and heritage interpretation, there's nothing in the cemetery that tells you that what's Dyke was the original historic western boundary of the cemetery, you see. So this is one of these many contradictions with a monument as large as early what's Dyke. At one level, it's very apparent in the landscape, but in built-up areas, in cemeteries, it's invisible. And heritage interpretations, not failing by any individual person or institution, but collectively, there's been very little to engage people with what's Dyke. And Wrexham Cemetery is one of the best because it's marked on the ground, and there you can see it covered by graves, but there's nothing to tell you about it. And so I did, at the beginning of 2019, a blog post that attempted for Wrexham, North Wales's largest town, for Wrexham, where what's Dyke runs along its western sides and through its western areas, including the cemetery on the southwest side of the town, or southwest side. I did a little blog called Where Can You Visit What's Dyke in Wrexham? So check that out. You can Google it or go to Howard Williams or Google search Archaeodeath, and you'll type in where can you visit what's Dyke in Wrexham. And I did a little survey, and I made some critical points about past research and past problems, and I pointed out how where you can get information off Archwilio, the online historic environments record, which is has detailed many points where you get information about it. The Ordnance Survey maps show it. There's older maps showing you the line of what's Dyke running from Basingwork around the edge of the Welsh uplands down to Maysbury in Shropshire, where it joins onto the Morder and the Vanwy and the Severn. So, but there's very few places that show you where what's Dyke goes through Wrexham. So I did a series of little guides to the various places, starting at Pandy, where I've already done a video, but then also in Garden Village and Acton, and then Plascoch, and past the railway station, and then down past the cemetery, and then into Erddig Park here, and then up to Erddig. So I thought, here you can read and you can see visual, sort of like a photo essay and discussions of what you can see on what's Dyke as you walk along. It's different levels of preservation, the size of the ditch varying, the size of the bank varying, and I thought that was a really good resource for people to get a sense of the monument. Now, that's all well and good, but I thought, well, there must be other ways we can enhance this. So I was in dialogue, and I still am in dialogue, with archaeologist and illustrator John G. Swagger. There he is with a horse on Watts Dyke. And we're working on a Watts Dyke heritage comic for Wrexham, a sort of walking guide that, using his comic media, of which he's been so effective at developing, to explore a new way of engaging communities in something that's at one level, as I say, so apparent in the landscape, another level is near invisible. So we went to visit some of the sites, and I discussed with him different ways we could visualize. And this is the bank of Watts Dyke, completely covered in tarmac, down a little ginnel or snicket or whatever you call it, running through houses in Garden Village. And so we thought, how do we visualize this for people? So that's something we're working on at the moment. And so in the lockdown, I've taken this a stage further, and I've started doing little videos, and I've put them on Twitter as uncut. And there's a link in my blog to the uncut videos, trying to chart, as I've been going with my son on bicycle, to visit some of these locations. So what you're going to see, moving on from this, and the rest of this YouTube video, are those sections. And so you'll see sort of different stopping points where I point out. But you can link the videos to the blog and read up a bit more about the different entries, and I'll put in the description below various web links to the Archaeodeath blog. So the idea of these videos is you can watch the video and maybe you can follow up and look at the blog for a bit more information. So that's really the introduction. That's a bit a long introduction, but I wanted to explain the rationale of the work I'm doing and ongoing here to use my blogging to talk about the visibility and intangibility of the third longest monument in the island of Britain and the British Isles, I think, this early medieval linear earthwork, and to think about ways we can digitally get people interested in it. And working with John Swagger has been a real privilege, and I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing with that sort of a heritage comic trail that we're going to do for Watts Dyke, and the blog and these videos I hope will work together. Yeah, I'm not the best, perhaps, and they're not perhaps best edited, and perhaps not the best shot videos. But my son's still learning to hold the camera still. But the idea really is to just give you anything is better than nothing sort of introduction to where you can see Watts Dyke in the Wrexham area. So thank you very much.
Yes, it's me again, Professor Howard Williams, back on Watts Dyke. This is one of the locations I didn't show you in previous videos, and we were cycling past it, and I thought I'd just drop in for a little quick video. So Watts Dyke in Acton, Wrexham, and the camera is currently looking southwards. So this is I'm standing where the ditch would have been of Watts Dyke, and behind us, which now forms the line of the back of gardens on Watts Dyke Way, you can see the bank of the monument, about 2 meters high at this point. So it's quite a substantial monument, and they kept this area free of housing when they extended and built these estates. There's some 1980s housing on that side. I think this is back to the 50s, 60s, because of this nationally important ancient monument. Yes, you've guessed it. It's Watts Dyke. I'm wearing my Offers Dyke t-shirt, and there's Offer himself, but I'm on Watts Dyke here in Acton, in the northern suburb of Wrexham. And the building, now closed because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the building behind me is Watts Dyke Primary School. There it is, just on the eastern side of Watts Dyke. And the bank here, and I'm standing in a denuded ditch. And you can see the ditch is a low depression, and on the skyline in the far distance you can see that it's still a sort of little nook in the profile of the hillside here. So yeah, damaged, denuded, but prominent and as a survival on the backs of a line of houses and a primary school. And here on this low hillock it has amazing views out towards Rwabon Mountain, and would have dominated landscape to the west and have good communication eastwards as well. Here we are in the heart of North Wales's largest town, Wrexham, and very few people will realise that On one side of us here we've got Glyndŵr University just off Crispin Lane, and beyond it Wrexham football ground. And running on this side of Crispin Lane, and you can see the earthwork there, is a disturbed, damaged section, but a clear surviving section of the late 8th century, early 9th century linear earthwork known as Wat's Dyke. And this runs parallel to Offa's Dyke for over 62 kilometres. It runs from Maysbury in Shropshire up to Basingwork in Flintshire. And as it runs through a section that has become part of the town of Wrexham, it's heavily damaged and lost in many places. It runs right by the Morrison supermarket, it runs along the backs of allotments, and in many sections it's been completely destroyed. But here, the road is following the line of Wat's Dyke, and here you can see a bit of the bank. Again, we're here in the heart of Wrexham, and another funny little survival of Wat's Dyke. This late 8th, early 9th century linear earthwork built by the Mercian kings as a frontier work, both aggressive and defensive against their Welsh rivals. Now here in the very centre of Wrexham, right next to the railway line, they built recently a Premier Inn. But just to the side of it, you can see a bank that's been built. Now that looks completely modern, but actually it's a reconstituted section of the bank of Wat's Dyke, which runs almost parallel to the railway line just to the south of Wrexham General Railway Station. And so there's no signs to tell you it, but that is actually one of the most interesting and central parts of Wat's Dyke's survival to the home of over 100,000 people, the town and suburbs of Wrexham. So this is a very odd and incongruous survival within North Wales's largest town. And here comes a train. Perfect timing. There it goes. Okay, so we're in Wrexham Cemetery, and here on the ground, marked on one of the paths in the cemetery, it says Clouth Wat. And this is one of two paths that marks the line of Wat's Dyke, this late 8th, early 9th century linear earthwork. So behind me you can see the rising ground there, heading off on a ridge. The original western boundary of the cemetery is marked by a monument over 1,000 years older than this Victorian burial ground. And while it looks very denuded, actually the bank is surviving up to a metre or so there, covered with Edwardian and before it Victorian graves. Here we are in Erddig Park, and on the northeast side of the Clywedog, on the top of the steep scarp overlooking the river, we have a well-preserved section of Wat's Dyke. So behind me you can see here the bank which drops down from the back gardens of various properties here in Wrexham, and the ditch before it rises up and then drops off steeply on this side. So over this side it goes way down steeply towards the river. So from here the trees today confuse you, because you can't imagine really in this heavy woodland how the monument would have worked to basically dominate the landscape over which it's looking southwestwards over the Clywedog River. So this is a monument about power and domination of the landscape. We're in Erddig Park here, a National Trust managed landscape associated with Erddig Hall, and this is on the very south side of Wrexham, and it abuts to the suburbs of Wrexham. Now why I brought you here is because at the river, this is the Clywedog River, we get a sense that Wat's Dyke isn't anywhere to be found, but actually it would have originally been designed to dominate and control this valley and this landscape. If you're a visitor to Erddig Hall today, you might be forgiven for not realising that, because there's nowhere that will tell you really about Wat's Dyke and how it operates in this landscape and where it still survives. But in the woods behind us, on the right, abutted by private residential back gardens, running along the top of the ridge of the Clywedog, is Wat's Dyke, and it follows that ridge top, so that anyone moving up and down this valley would have been overlooked, would have been observable, and their movement curtailed by the line of the dike. Now it's lost on the floodplain of the river, but somewhere across here, possibly on the line from those big trees and that gate, across to the river at this bridge, or very close to it, Watts Dyke would have originally run. It would have run and cut across the valley at this point, and then if you spin around behind you, spin the camera around, in those trees over the other side of the bridge is the 11th century Motte and Bailey castle of Erddig Castle. And you can't see it now, but the earthworks are very impressive. And we have traces of Watts Dyke running up to, along the ridge of the Black Brook, up to that location. So in other words, we have Watts Dyke drawing in along the ridges of the Black Brook stream coming from the south and the Clywedog coming from the northwest, drawing together at this location and then blocking the valley at this position that 2.5 centuries afterwards a Norman baron or lord established a castle at this strategic location. Now it seems that he may have been already aware of Watts Dyke as a linear earthwork, even if it wasn't still used 2 centuries later by the Normans, but this location was strategic in both contexts, in the late 8th, early 9th century and in the 11th, early 12th centuries, because this is a key location for controlling traffic west-east along the Clywedog from the Welsh uplands into the Cheshire Plain, and it's a key location for controlling north-south movement along the edge of the Welsh uplands. Here we are at Erddig Castle, just outside Erddig Hall, the National Trust property, and behind me is the very impressive surviving motte of the castle, but it seems to incorporate the line of Watts Dyke. So we're standing on here a bit of Watts Dyke, a spur that runs down past the castle and down to the confluence of the Clywedog and the Black Brook. So here we have, incorporated into the 11th century castle, an 8th, 9th century Mercian frontier work. Right, here we are at a very exciting location because there's 2 ancient monuments to see in Big Wood at Erddig, in the grounds of the National Trust property of Erddig Hall. Now, on the camera's left, we have the Outer Bailey ditch running along. On the camera's right there, the huge ditch of the 11th and early 12th century Motte and Bailey castle. So this is an Anglo-Norman castle, and the motte is situated on the peninsula above where the Black Brook behind the camera and the Clywedog on the north join together. So it's a peninsular site for an Anglo-Norman castle. And this is really impressive, the scale of this ditch. I don't know how many metres that, but that's about 7-8 metres deep. It's huge, outer defensive line. Now that's really exciting, and there's a interpretation panel explaining about the castle, and it only briefly, however, mentions the existence here of Watts Dyke. And that it says that the natural topography of the landscape and the pre-existing 8th century defensive boundary of Watts Dyke was used in the construction of Erddig Castle, but it doesn't tell you where Watts Dyke is. So most people coming here will certainly see this, but they won't see the second and arguably, well, definitely older and more important ancient monument, because this huge ditch cuts the line of Watts Dyke. So if you follow me, and I go around here. This is the point where the ditch and bank of Watts Dyke, which are following the scarp and dominating the line of the Black Brook, are cut by the ditch of the Anglo-Norman castle in the 11th century. So you're looking over the 11th century ditch at the 8th, 9th century ditch of the Mercian frontier work of Watts Dyke. Now, the camera is looking northwards from just on the north side of Erddig Hall, and in the woods, in Big Wood, heading up to the peninsula where the Black Rock stream meets with the Clywedog River, there's a really well preserved section of Watts Dyke, and here it's of a scale comparable to anywhere you could see a good preserved section of Offa's Dyke, making the point that Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke seem to have been built to a similar scale and magnitude. And here in the woods, it's well preserved. To the south, behind the camera, in front of Erddig Hall, from at least the 18th century, it's been completely landscaped away and it disappears for a stretch. But here you've got it really well preserved. So you can see clearly the notch of the ditch, and the bank is on my and your right. And the bank here is really well preserved, and if anybody misses it, they at least appreciate the fact that you can walk up it on this nice, well organised path, so you don't erode it anymore. So this path gives you a really clear visual sense of the scale of the monument. And here I am on top of the bank. Well, this is one of the best preserved bits of Watts Dyke, and it's at the rookery just to the south of Erddig Park. And here Sir Cyril Fox surveyed the monument. Now, over that side, the river, the Black Brook, has cut away and eroded the line, so it ends abruptly at this point. So the ditch you can see here just stops because it goes off and it's eroded. There's no more of it left. But if you pan around and look down the line here, you can see a really well preserved stretch as it drops down and then heads up onto that line of trees on the other side of this little declivity.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the Archaeodeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.